Hey, buddy, how are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm all right.
It is growing back.
Yeah, little by little. It's
We're
pretty on the
meet
short side, but it's there.
we're kind of meeting in the middle.
That's right.
Mine was down here, and I just really didn't want to look like that dude who's in all the headlines of screaming at that cop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I me at a side
Good idea.
profile, I kind of looked a lot like him, and even though I'm not going outside, I just didn't. I looked in the mirror and I was grossed out. So
Yeah, that's going to be a new aesthetic. We're
yeah,
going to carry that with us for a while.
yeah. So you know, uh, obviously I've got related to GBH. By the way, this is just how we start. So don't
Okay, that's fine
it's
by me.
okay. I've got some questions lined up regarding GBH, of course, but also I've got some friends from some different text groups as well as members of the Fervent Few that wrote some questions. So we'll get to those kind of at the end. But
Okay.
literally the first thing I wrote down, and this is the section regarding what the hell's going on right now in this industry. It literally says first sentence, what the fuck is happening? Obviously right now, I've been trying to avoid on the podcast and on like my social media getting too deep into the weeds on what's happening with COVID-19 and coronavirus. But I figure if there's anybody I could talk to about how it's going to affect and how it is affecting the beer industry, seems like you'd be the right guy to at least have that back and forth with. So, um, just
Yeah.
on a surface level, what are you seeing like as far as rapid pivoting by breweries? Like you're obviously talking to a lot more breweries than I am.
Yeah, and some of them on a daily basis because they're our clients. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely can't speak for everybody, and it's just one perspective. But I think big picture wise, what we're seeing is just an extremely rapid time cycle of change that I think a lot of it would have played out over the next 10 years. Some of it would have played out over the next few years. Things like delivery becoming more important. I think that the number of breweries we have now, that especially that are own premise or tap room based, they were already starting to put up numbers that kind of made them more like restaurants than breweries in terms of their resilience financially, how much they relied on foot traffic and how much turnover there might have been. Like, so we were already kind of coming up on some of these critical issues. Um, and COVID-19 just put an economic and social pressure on some of those things in a way that we never, in any scenario you never would have planned for. So, now we see breweries that were taproom only pivoting to package and home delivery as a new business model, and they're probably going to have to stick with that for a long, long time. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. They're not going to get Nobody's going to get numbers back above 50% probably in the next year, if we're lucky. I mean, even if things open up, we're just going to have so much social change of how we perceive situations and what it means to go out and interact with other people that you don't know. That's going to take a long time to shake off. And it might never. We might be seeing a fundamental change in how we behave in public. And we've seen it before, right? Like,
Yeah.
after stuff like 9/11, like all of a sudden we have a state that is existing in an extreme security scenario. And most of our daily lives, like when we go to the airport, we interact with a post 9/11 airport. We're probably never going to go back to those days before that. I mean, I remember my parents coming all the way to the gate with me to like,
Yeah.
send me off on my first
Yeah.
flight.
We're
Um,
about, we're both old enough to remember some of that. It is
yeah,
crazy when you think about obviously younger folks, they, weren't old enough to remember the days before the internet. They don't remember the
right.
days before 9/11. These are big cultural shifts. And I can't imagine that this isn't going to be one of them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
It seems like it might be the
whether,
biggest, honestly.
yeah, whether we're talking about, I mean, I think obviously you and I, with what we do, there's a lot of conversation about breweries and restaurants, but um, outside of our bubble that we work in, you as a father,
Yeah,
you have a son, if you don't mind me mentioning, you've mentioned on your
yeah,
Twitter that is immunocompromised. So I remember you being one of the first people who like, I think, I was definitely taking this all serious, but I remember seeing your reaction first.
mm,
And it really, I was like, oh, okay. And as somebody who obviously you're kind of known for looking at market trends and things and kind of seeing the writing on the wall, that it meant something to me that you were like, oh, you jumped pretty quick. on
Yeah, I
reacting to
mean,
this?
there were definitely a number of factors for me. I mean, I travel a ton for my job, which might be a massive change for me going forward. Um, I mean, we had just hosted our Uppers and Downers Festival for about 1,000 people, and I'd just gone to Costa Rica, and I was just getting ready to go back down to Florida to do the Food for Thought Festival with Green Bench down there. And I'd been paying attention to the COVID-19 thing and wondering how it might influence things, but none of it felt really that immediate yet. It felt like there was the potential for something, flu-like that was bad and not good for older people, but it didn't really indicate any problems for younger folks. And I didn't really have any big concerns. I was packed and ready to go the next morning. This was Wednesday night, and that's when I was watching the NBA, and I watched the NBA pull everybody off the court, even as our president went on camera and tried to tell everybody everything was going to be okay. And those two things were in direct opposition to each other. And I don't think I'm alone in the fact that I would trust a large corporation like the NBA to protect itself from something more than I would trust Donald Trump to protect us from anything. So most of the things that he thought I think were going to be reassuring just sent off a lot of red flags for me, and that's when I sort of began to quickly realize, like, oh, this thing is everywhere already. That this isn't like an emerging threat. Like, we're already way behind.
Right.
So I made the call that night, texting with Green Bench and a few other friends, and telling them that it wasn't worth the risk. I didn't really feel like I was personally at a lot of risk, but I was already starting to think about other people I could infect, which was, for me, that's my family. That's my oldest son who has Down syndrome. Respiratory illnesses are particularly hellish for him sometimes. So, I mean, if he gets whooping cough, we end up in the ER. If he gets this thing, who knows what happens? So that's when I made the call, and then I think overnight and the next morning, it became really clear to me that, like, we were shutting the studio down. We were working from home, and because we have the luck, we were lucky that the kind of business we run can do that. We can work remotely, anytime we need to. So we sent everybody home. Some of them stayed a little bit longer. They didn't, I stayed home. Some of them stayed home immediately. A couple others kind of kept coming in every couple of days or whatever to do some work. But slowly but surely, we just kind of went into lockdown. And lockdown for me is pretty serious because of my kids. So, like, all our groceries are being delivered. We're not going to any place where people can congregate. I've been to the studio to get mail and, like, check on the plants and water them. And I did, like, a couple days worth of work there by myself because nobody else is going now. But other than that, we haven't been out anywhere. I went to one brewery to pick up some beer down to Off Color because that was the only way I could get it. I was kind of curious how I was going to feel about that, and I think they did a great job. But I still walked away feeling like this is still threatening. Even though there was no immediate threat in the environment to me there, like it still felt like I was putting myself out there and taking risks. So it's tricky, man. Yeah, we went into lockdown pretty fast, and we haven't let up since. That Wednesday that Trump went on TV was basically the last day my family left the house for anything more than like a walk around the block.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll admit to, about 5 weeks or like last weekend, we finally kind of broke down, and we call our best friends who live up an hour north of us, and that's where I have all my barrels at and everything. So it's something where I was, already kind of planning on going up there to check on some work related stuff. And we just, it we were thinking about it in this way, like, we go to the grocery store, we're still going to the grocery store,
Mm-hmm.
and being safe, you know wiping everything off when it comes home, mask, gloves, the whole thing. um and since the beginning they've been saying, well, obviously, you can go to the grocery store and that's fine, and like that is to nourish or to sustain your body as far as sustenance and food. At
Mm-hmm.
some point there's a mental health aspect where we're
Yeah.
losing it, and we just want to be with like our best friends who have also been isolating, and they also have like a baby, and so we waited 5 weeks so no one was showing any signs of anything. We
Mm-hmm.
went last week, and we're hoping to go visit for like and we didn't hug or anything, but we're hoping to go next weekend to do like a social distancing picnic or something. Just basically we're doing 2-week incubation windows to make sure no one's signs of anything from like leaving.
Yeah.
And so I'm not perfect, and I'm sure there's a lot, and obviously we all know people who are just not even giving a shit, and it's
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's crazy,
Yeah, I've done
man.
a couple of backyard hangs at a distance with people
Yeah,
that are friends of mine. Um, and man, it's wild. Like I keep thinking in terms of like fidelity now, like especially since we're doing calls like this that are on Zoom or you're talking over the phone, you're texting a lot. Like those used to exist like in the interstitial space of our socializing, and now it's all of it, right? So
yeah,
like that fidelity level was never all that important. In fact, low fidelity kind of helped you focus on other things that were really required your attention. But when you now stand a short distance from one of your friends and you have a conversation that can be layered rather than you
hmm
talk, then I talk, then you talk, then I
hmm
talk. Uh, the fidelity of that conversation is almost mind bending.
yeah,
Like it feels like you're on drugs that are making things hyper real. Like
yeah. And while
it's
there's like, your loved ones or spouse or partner is having another conversation 10 feet away, and you're getting like that information coming in kind of in the
yeah
periphery, and you're having a beer that didn't come from your refrigerator, it came from your friend's, it's like just little thing. It's tactile. It's like the whole, yeah.
yeah, it's weird, man. It's anytime I travel, especially in a foreign country where like I can't read the signs really, because it's in another
hmm
language or something, I find that my brain can't really filter out what's important and what's not. Like it kind of tries to pay attention to everything.
Yeah, you're
Um,
hyper alert. But
yeah,
yeah, so
and
it's
that's what that
interesting.
feels like when somebody
hmm
hands you a beer that came from their fridge. You're just like, this is a beer from someone else's fridge. It's
Is
like, why
this
is my
safe?
brain even
Yeah,
processing
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. What's funny is like there was, I don't remember who I was listening to, some psychedelic dude, like I don't know, it may have been like Timothy Leary or Ram Dass or somebody, and he was talking about somebody, one of his followers was saying something along the lines about you know um, religious practice wearing like something that can identifies them as that, and they were commenting, I think they were talking about like, because this, it was like in the 60s and 70s, they were talking about the, what are the group that hangs out at the airport and passes out the little booklets,
Oh,
um
the Hare
Hare
Krishnas.
Krishnas. Yeah, so
Yeah,
they're talking about that, and basically they were kind of like half joking about it, but basically the person said like, actually like part of the reason for that is you're in your day to day, you're in your everyday life, and everything is just kind of static, and then you see somebody who's so out of place because they look like they're a Bedouin from the Middle East in the 1400s, and then you're like, it just snaps you into what, like it's that moment. It's
yeah.
like, and so this is kind of like our new norm, is us sitting in our houses talking like this, and so just the act of being around each other can be that elevating.
Yeah, it feels radical.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Hmm.
So I don't want obviously that we could talk, this could be hours of conversation just about this, but people don't listen to my podcast to hear me talk about all the
Now
downer
you're gonna
stuff.
stick to the beer
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, adjacent to the beer, at least, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So at least in the reference to what's going on with coronavirus, and like you said, I don't, and I agree, I don't see things ever really going back 100%, and I definitely think we're going to see some things sticking around. In fact, that was actually questions, we'll skip ahead. um, Michael McAllister from Fervent Few actually asked, what is one thing from the Beer Insider marketplace that has changed during the pandemic that each of you think will stick, and what is one thing that you each think will go away? What do you
Hmm.
think something that is that's
Yeah,
going to stay away?
I'm definitely thinking a lot about what newness means right now in craft beer. There are breweries out there that their entire identity is built around never making the same beer twice. Some of that might continue, of course, but I think what we're seeing now is that people are ordering larger quantities less often. So even if they're not going back to, what we might consider like the flagships of the 90s and the early aughts, we're seeing people buy in that way. They're buying cases of beer at a time, and they're getting it directly delivered from a brewery. And there are costs when you do that. There's delivery costs. There's the cost of like having to browse and figure out where you want to go, and when you want to buy something, where you're going to get it. So there's a little bit more kind of thoughtful labor involved in your beer purchasing now than ever before. Whereas you used to just be able to show up and see whatever was new and try it and drink it. And we call that trial. So I think trial is going to be a really hard thing to prop up. going forward for a while.
Hmm.
Are people really going to take a flyer on a a 16 or a $20 4 pack of something when they can get something they already know they really like, and they can buy a case of it at a discount or something and have that delivered?
And now,
I think
now
those
people,
behaviors.
I was gonna say, now people have woken up to how fragile some things are, and so maybe they don't have time to like invest in a risk. Like there's already so much real risk. Now everyone's been made aware of what real risk looks like,
Yeah.
and so taking a risk on a beer, like, no, why would I do that? I'm just gonna buy the one I know I like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what you're describing is basically a new cognitive load that we're all going to be carrying for a long, long time. Like a big piece of our brains is going to be devoted to a very real risk that is not going away for a couple of years, probably. Um, that means that there's a big part of our brain that's not going to relax, and it's not going to just like look around for what's new and jump in and take, even take little risks. We're going to be very risk averse culture for a long time. So yeah, I think there's a part of the beer market that kind of existed on the privilege of a banging economy, a bunch of people that were safe and were taking risks on lots of different kinds of things and just wanted something new to kind of tickle and entertain them. Um, I think a major part of that sentiment is going to go away for a long time, and people are going to just be focused on like what's good, what's dependable, what's available and safe. I think there's going to be a lot of beer purchasing. It's just going to be done in a way we haven't seen in 20, 30 years.
So that's
Um,
something new you think that is going to stick around.
yeah, I
On
think
mine, I'll
so.
make it quick. I think that beer delivery. The thing is, at least here in California, it was already legal to ship beer in the state of California. Just nobody wanted to do the infrastructure to build it out in their tap room until, or to their brewery till now they had to,
Now it's a
and
lifeline.
now it's a lifeline. But I don't think that you can put that genie back in the bottle. And I think it's people are seeing that alternative streams of revenue have always been important, and now they really realize that they should have maybe not put all their eggs in the taproom basket, and so they're going to keep that alternative stream of revenue. People are excited here in Northern California that they can get monkish for the first time, you know.
You
um
can buy other half beer in a Wegmans in upstate New York right now.
yeah,
That's fucking ridiculous.
yeah. So I don't think that's going away.
No,
So
I think you're right.
that's my quick one. And then as far as something that you think is that has come out but is not going to last, what do you think?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think that the numbers that are being put up right now in packaged stores, grocery channels, major retailers, I mean, they're seeing Fourth of July numbers every week. Um, I think those brands are going to benefit for the short term, just because the access to market is so narrow right now, where you can buy beer and how you can do it, and people are stocking up. I think the moment that we get, and this is a little bit counter to what I was saying before, like I think the moment that we start to relax a little bit and we start to feel safe again, I think people are going to buy, a little bit less beer at a time. I think they're going to buy seasonals instead of flagship. I mean, right now, people like everybody thinks that this is the return of the flagship. It's really, I mean, that's just what's available right now. Like
Yeah.
people are just doubling down on what they can make fastest and best and easiest, and they have a ton of printed cans ready to go for. Like
Hmm.
this is all a matter of necessity on the producer side, not on demand. So like, yeah, I mean, if you're putting up huge numbers because of your flagship pale ale, that's great for now, but eventually people will want some kind of fresh thing. And so I think in the middle, I think we're going to see some of those flagships fall off into their normal numbers, or at least diminished from what they're doing now. And I think seasonals are going to take their place more than they ever have. I mean, suddenly getting a summer ale from Sam Adams is going to seem like a breath of fresh fucking air
Yeah.
if you've been crushing Boston Lager for the last 2 months. Um, so yeah, I think there's a little too much faith right now in what's going on in some of these mass retail channels with flagships, large formats. I think craft is going to continue to nip away at that as it gets its infrastructure better at home delivery, direct to
Hmm.
consumer shipping. I think that's going to be the growth engine for craft now, which is going to be small, but it's going to chip away like it always does.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback on that and say that um, I do think that as people's anxiety levels come down slowly, um, and the perceived risk, whether the actual biological risk has changed at all, but the perceived risk decreases, I think that they will calm slightly and remember that they have small local businesses that are about to go under if they don't
Yeah,
change their buying habits. So it's easy to just say, I'm going to go to the big chain grocer and get the big beer that I already know And
Yeah.
it's just, I don't want to think about it, but slowly that thought of the brands you love on a local level are going to creep back into your brain, and you're
Yep.
going to remember. And so that's kind of it's just another layer onto what you already said, like
Yeah.
but I think that
I've seen it
that's
in my own behaviors. I mean, one of the first things I did was order a bunch of Modelo.
yeah.
And like that's not normal for me. Like
I
I mean,
think
I enjoy that beer, but like I can't remember the last time I bought a couple 12 packs of it, you know?
I think
Um
you were buying Modelo, and a couple of other people on for if you were buying like High Life. It was
yeah.
just like panic. I
Yeah.
think
It just
I
felt like the
bought
right thing to do. And then
yeah,
but once that was gone, it was like, all right, like I think this week it's going to be all about off color. And then next
yeah.
week I ordered a couple cases of Solemn Oath, you know, their Kolsch and their IPA.
Mhm.
Like my brain started to like work through the noise a little bit more, and like
Mhm.
it was like, oh, this is available. And if somebody's making it discoverable, like, you know, their social media presence is strong
Right.
and they're getting in your face and they're reminding you they exist and you can get this beer that you love, it becomes a pretty quick and easy transaction if they can get that system in place, you know, from Instagram to ordering to delivery.
Right.
And that's everybody's new challenge is like, you've got to be discoverable and you've got to be able to get to consumers directly.
Um, kind of the last question before we get specifically into GBH topics. I did want to ask, like, as a guy like myself who is trying to make my way through the fog of entrepreneurship, 10 years ago, starting a brewery looked one way. And I will say now it looks much different. And I think in 10 months, 10 years from now, it's going to look, of course, different. But can you, based on your, um, your look at the market and what's going on, can you kind of talk about the traditional business models and the traditional ways of entering the market and what you think things are going to look like moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, I used to think about it in like a before and after, but now I think there's a third that we're kind of talking about in different ways right now. But I used to talk about it in terms of like a brewery used to mean a factory, right? And then those factories kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but they were still manufacturing places. They were small manufacturing, and that's what we thought of as a brewery. And then the own premise revolution happened, and we started thinking about breweries in terms of hospitality, like tap rooms, not just brew pubs, which have been around forever, but like the tap room thing, and especially in urban areas where tap rooms were kind of positioned almost like restaurants along a, you know, a busy corridor where there's lots of other restaurants and places to eat and drink. They started competing with bars. So now they're not just small manufacturers. Manufacturing is almost like hidden in the back, and you are now like a hospitality service.
Right.
Um, Now I think you know, with that under threat and things already kind of moving in this direction, I think that the direct to consumer model is the future of what we're going to think of as a brewery. We're going to think of breweries like we think of Dollar Shave Club. It's going to be a thing that shows up in your mail once a week, once a month. That's going to be our primary experience with a lot of beer, with a lot of breweries. And we're going to consume them in our homes. And we already know that there are a lot of larger trends kind of pushing in this direction anyway, of younger people hanging out at home, getting things for cheap delivered. Not cheap necessarily, but like, you know, luxury items kind of at an affordable price, and enjoying them with their friends in their living rooms. There was already large trends of that happening in the US. This is another thing that I think COVID-19 just puts on hyperspeed. That's going to be the primary way that we all drink and socialize going forward for a long time. So yeah, it went from being manufacturing to hospitality to direct to consumer. Like your ability to ship well and manage your brand over social and over email with your customers is going to be the primary way that you do business well. Um, in that regard, I think you're kind of in this like, you know, you have the ability to benefit from your patience and your speed to market or lack thereof is like you're basically in a position to do that part very very well.
Yeah, I was
Keep it
just going to
small, keep it
mention.
profitable, and keep it direct to consumer. I mean,
Yeah, I was going to mention that, like, so right now the situation with AltBrau is we're recording this on Sunday, May 3rd. Tomorrow I'll announce a bottle sale through Shady Oak. So all my beers, I'm still a home brewer,
mhm.
and I am given a creative space at my friend's brewery up in Santa Rosa at Shady Oak. And I'm in the kind of the proof of concept phase, but ultimately the beers that are made there are my creations, my blends, my ingredient sourcing, everything. And um my plan was to like introduce those to like key like key accounts. You know, we obviously in Northern California have really fantastic bars and restaurants that I've already been acquainted with through my day job. And so I thought, you know, that was going to be the way to go. And literally, like the week the shit really hit the fan, um, was when I was going to start doing releases. And I put out on my Instagram stories a little poll asking people if I should wait or if I should, you know, as the news was breaking, if I should wait or if I should just go for it. And I was about 70% of people said go for it. And you and a few other people whose opinions I really respect said wait. And I'm glad I did. And because now it's exactly what you're talking about. Not only would like the release of my first beers through Shady Oak be kind of lost in the mix, but um, it just would have been a nightmare. And now that, you know, I would not say the dust has settled in any way, but we are living a little bit in a new norm. And so I'm able to kind of just readjust, pivot like everybody else.
Yeah. And you're lucky. I mean, you're a good communicator. You handle like grassroots branding really well, and like you connect with people really well. Like those are all skill sets for the new normal when it comes to small brands that are going to be direct to consumer. That's how you'll be successful. I mean, these brands that are used to just like, you know, letting distributors build their brand and just putting it on grocery store shelves. Like, man, you're going to have a very difficult time trying to scale down to the personal level of what direct to consumer really requires.
Right. So yeah, I think, well, obviously news seems to be changing daily, but I agree with you. I do think that we're in a new age of people starting brands and the way that breweries are perceived. But what's interesting is this model I'm now kind of falling into is similar to what's already been happening with in Belgium. And some of them, you know, I have friends overseas like that they do a bottle membership and that's all they do. And that's the only beers they get to anybody. And then they do, I shouldn't say only, the only way that you can own a bottle at home is through their membership. And then they do ticketed tasting events. So like when restaurants reopen in limited capacity, they're probably going to be looking for ways to do high ticket dinners because they can't do a lot of people in their restaurant because we're still going to be living in this environment. And, you know, margins at restaurants are already so thin. So they're going to have to like up the ticket price to have a dinner because they're only allowed to do 20 seats that night. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we always joke that like, you know, you pay for the experience at a restaurant, and holy shit, yeah, you're right.
It's
going to
double.
Be paying for that going.
So, yeah, because if you have half as many people, the cost of having a dinner out is going to double. That's what's going to happen. Yep. So
the literal cost of that chair. Yeah, that's wild. I hadn't even thought about that yet. That's great.
So, related to Good Beer Hunting, you know, I'm not going to get too much into like how you started. There's plenty of interviews where you've gotten into it and you described the structure of your business regarding, you know, you have partners and clients where you're doing design and marketing concepts, but then you have the whole editorial side. And despite multiple interviews and multiple explanations, do you still feel like there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the hell Good Beer Hunting is?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm often surprised by where, you know, some of those people are that have that misunderstanding. But whatever, you know, it's. I've always known that it was going to be a challenge of a multifaceted organization because, I mean, it's like when you get to know a person, where you've met them in life is how you always think of them, right? So like, there are still people in my life that still think of me as like the baseball guy. Like that's pretty wild to me. Like and they almost always call me Mike. Which is hilarious. And then there's people that think of me as the writer and the poet because that's what I studied, and like they'll always think of me that way. And now, you know, now there are certainly people who will always think of me as the beer guy. These are all really relatable to me, and they're connected in, you know, important ways. But it's hard for other people to connect those dots because they have a confirmation and a recency bias based on what they knew of you when. And we, as humans, we tend to just lock that kind of information in, and it's really hard to uncement that sometimes. So based on when you knew Good Beer Hunting or what part of the business you interacted with first, it makes it very difficult to understand the rest of the organization. And so that's something that we've always been working hard to kind of passively educate people about, like expose the ecosystem as much as we can, help them understand the relationship between those pieces of the business. and how those pieces are very specifically divided. Those are just as those are just as important as the connections. So yeah, there's a lot of effort that goes into that. It feels like sweeping the sand on a beach sometimes,
Right.
but you just have to keep doing it. There's nothing. Yeah, you don't really have a choice.
I mean,
But transparency is the biggest mechanism we have for all that.
I was going to say the thing I've learned probably most just from, seeing what you do a little bit on an internal level, member of the Fervent Few, and I've had the honor to contribute a little bit for the B-roll series.
Yeah,
I think what people don't see and understand is the logistics and the cost of operation, both like financial cost and you know mental well-being. Everybody I see everybody really putting their hearts into their projects, whether it's designers doing artistic projects or it's editorial trying to break a story. So um yeah, I've always been drawn to what you guys have been doing, and the fact that I get to contribute in any ways has been really cool for me. So I just want to say
oh man,
thank you.
it was exciting for me. I mean, uh, everybody on our editorial side kind of has their own background and their own perspective, and their own, even in their heads, they have a different perception of what good beer hunting is. And I kind of have this joke internally whenever I see somebody that does something in the way that I personally would have done it, like 10 years ago when I was
Right.
like the only writer on the site. I always joke around and be like, "Oh, hey, someone's doing the good beer hunting," because we have so many pieces of editorial now that are like far superior to anything that I used to do. Whether it's Roth's analysis or the poetic kind of feature writing that somebody like Claire does, and then just all the perspectives and the different locations they're writing from. So when I see somebody that's just doing something that feels kind of like raw and personal and like especially human, and it feels like it's at a level that is like it's hard to describe. It just feels very tangible to me. Um, that's when it feels like the good beer hunting that I love the most, or that I recognize in the version of it that I myself really love. And so your pieces, I mean, I kind of saw you doing the good beer hunting on your own, right? Just in your own life, the pictures you were sharing and the way you tell little stories in the Fervent Few. And man, I got really jazzed when I saw that. It felt like I don't know, it felt like a recipe I hadn't seen in a while. It was cool.
I'm honored to be able to contribute. That kind of goes into one of the questions I had, which is like, how do you kind of come across people that you think you would like to have them contribute? Is it a similar situation where they're basically doing the work independent? They're already doing it in the spirit of what you would call like what you imagine GBH being, and you just kind of pull them into the
Yeah.
or like basically I just wanted to see what your thoughts are. You kind of touched on it, but
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely how I go about it. But I think the majority of the writers that we're bringing in now, I think, come in through Claire Bullen's personal relationships or who she's paying attention to, and so that's bringing a different perspective and a tone to things in a really compelling way. She's brought in some phenomenal writers that are talking, telling like really slow burn kind of iconic stories for us right now that are blowing me away. I tend to look for the people that are on the kind of like a little off the radar. They're already doing something in a different vein. They're not really trying to be a feature writer necessarily. I like finding them when they're just kind of like inspired to do something small, and I can see the seeds of it in there. And I know that if we just water that for a while, that could become a really compelling voice. I take a lot of pride in the fact that a lot of the awards that we've won for Good Beer Hunting's editorial are usually given to writers that don't write for anybody else and have never written for anybody else. I mean, they were just kind of plucked out of the wilderness of the internet. I take a lot of pride in that. I also take a lot of pride in being a really really strong platform that's attractive to like seasoned veteran writers, like people like Evan Rail, who's helping us build an international group of voices now. I kind of love that we have those two things almost in tension, in a very healthy tension on our site. Like from an editorial perspective, it's a lot of work. I mean, working with seasoned writers is exciting and it's fun. They tend to turn in like pretty good copy that doesn't require
mhm.
a ton of work. And so, working with other people who are inexperienced and haven't had a chance at something like this yet, might be intimidated by it. That can be a lot of work, but man, the payoff is so big when you just like when you find a voice like that and it grows into something really compelling. Um, I don't know. I personally take a lot of pride in that because I guess that's what I felt like I was when I started
Mhm.
writing about beer. I mean, I have my own writing accolades in other areas, but writing about beer was risky for me. When I started, I didn't barely knew anything. Um, so I like the idea that other people can kind of follow that path on good beer hunting still, even though it's as big as it is now.
You recently mentioned that you finally have like a solid West Coast California team.
It's
And
gotten pretty cool. Yeah, I mean that's always been spotty for us. Uh, Mike Sardina was sort of the OG voice for us when he lived in San Diego and he worked at Society Brewing.
Mhm.
Man, he wrote some great pieces for us. But then when he moved up to Vermont, we kind of went quiet out there for a while. But now we've got Beth Demon,
Mhm.
who, who I think she's one of the more like chaotic good personalities we've got on the team.
I think that's a great description.
Yeah, she's written some really cool stuff for us. And then
Got Alyssa.
Alyssa up in San Francisco has been phenomenal. I mean, she's a veteran. She's a killer writer. She's
Mhm.
been doing the podcast for us as well. That's kind
Mhm.
of an experiment for her and like taking a big risk and trying something totally new in a new format she's never done. I think she's doing a good job. We've got Clara Rice, who's a photographer in the East Bay.
Mhm.
She was somebody that I just found because I needed a picture of Dave McLean for a podcast cover because like Alyssa had forgotten to take a picture of him for the cover, and I found her photo and asked if we could use it. And then 2 weeks later, I was at East Brother up in Richmond, one of our clients, and she met me at the tap room just to say hey. Um, Loved her personality, and she was super interested in what good beer hunting was. She hadn't really worked for anybody like that before, and we care as much about photographers as we do writers because my background is kind of both. So I think we pay pretty well and competitively, especially compared to small dailies and alternative mags for photographers. We're just they're usually just looking to get something for free. So the fact that we were hiring photographers and showcasing the work really well, she got really psyched about that. And we paired her up with Alyssa to do that resilience story, which is one of
Mhm.
the best things
Which,
we've ever written.
yeah, I was gonna say that was huge.
Yeah.
Um, well, with that in mind, now that you've got a California team, what is an area of the country or the world that you would like to maybe build?
Yeah. I mean, our efforts right now are, we're looking further in international markets. Evan is helping us do that. He's based in Prague. So he's now our international editor. We hired him on right after the new year, right before COVID happened. And with an eye towards Eastern Europe, an eye towards Southeast Asia, Japan, China, Taiwan, places like that, Vietnam, and not just travel pieces, which a lot of our writers had done in the past, but like pieces that were written from somebody there, from the
Mhm.
inside of the scene there, which is what we're always after. We've got a piece coming out from South Africa that's really compelling. That he commissioned with a writer named Lucy down there that I'm excited about. And we started doing Spanish translations from Paul Garcia, who lives in South America, and he's been sort of helping us round up a few voices that might be potential writers for us down there. So the work for us in that isn't it's not just a culture or a language barrier. It's really finding who those voices are that are really compelling writers. They're also culturally connected, and they understand beer in the way that Good Beer Hunting wants to present beer. These are, we're constantly on the hunt for a different kind of unicorn in a different place all the time, and we're patient enough to wait until we get it. We're not trying to rush anything. We're not trying to just get coverage of an area. I think a lot of magazines that just try to have coverage often just get you something that doesn't really matter all that much. We're willing to wait until we can do it really really well with the right people and have something really special to offer. So far, Evan's doing a great job. He already got a piece out of Japan that was happened right around the time of COVID, and he's got this piece out of South America coming, and he's going to start blogging for us. He's going to have his own blog on GBH called Retro Causality,
That's
um,
awesome.
where he's basically just looking at the world as if the world of beer that thinks everything is new. His job is to remind us that everything that is new has happened before and will happen again, which feels especially relevant right now.
So, speaking of that topic, I had some questions from a friend of mine. He lives, I believe, in Berlin. His name is Benedict Koch. His
What a
home
name!
brewing, his project is called Wilderwald, so WILDERWALD. He's become one of the respected names in like traditional German Berliner Weise, and he is in one of my many text groups with many different brewers and people, and I kind of threw out there that I was going to be talking to you. So he had a couple questions, and it kind of goes back to the work that Evan is doing. He says, "What does uh, what does Kaiser think about bitter wild ales? I feel they will become a trend. Stuff like Antidote is doing with bitterness from herbs and barks. So in other words, kind of maybe Gruit inspired, not non-hop bitter beers. What do you think? Do you see development in that market internationally or locally?"
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'll be known in a specific way like that as a category necessarily, but I think as I think as wild ales and balanced wild ales, not just sours, but like things that have balance, things that are acidic but not sour. Um, you know, uh, I think that will continue to kind of slow burn grow the way that the wild ale and saison category seems to continue doing. But I wouldn't expect that to suddenly be a new hot trend or anything like that. I don't think I think our days of anything in wild ale becoming like really trendy are kind of over. I think all of that stuff, it was always small to begin with. I mean, only people like us inside of this little bubble really understand or really see those things as trends, right?
Right.
Most people never encounter those things because they're almost impossible to get your hands on. So they can never become real trends, not like an IPA or anything like that. So I think, nerds are going to continue to find new ways to be nerdy. I mean, I'm always interested in something compelling that's, a little left of center from where I thought the category was, or I thought was interesting about it. So, I mean, I think what we saw with something like Kvikist is a great example of something that can, kind of blow up outside of that tiny, tiny little bubble, but still remain tiny.
But it's ultimately in the service of making hazy IPA.
Right.
So
Everything will be.
A follow-up from Benedict is, he says, he actually has two more about similar kind of thing. Might kind of, I'll just read the next two back to back because you might have a similar answer for both. He says, what about Berliner Weisse, reality versus tradition, and the fight of Ulrika and others to establish Brett in Berliner? So if you're familiar with Schneeule, it's Schneeule. It's like the old school Berliner Weisse from Berlin, where she is doing it super traditional, like sometimes a no boil, almost always with Brettanomyces. So that's who, and he talks about Ulrika. That's what he's talking about. She has become one of the respected, almost historians of like recreating traditional Berliner Weisse. The next question was another one. Does he think the lambic trend will go down and all the new brewers and blenders that pop up in Belgium will go down? Lambic Fabrique, Belgu. There's a couple of new school lambic brewers and blenders that he's talking about. And so he's asking about Berliner Weisse, about lambic. Like I said, it kind of might go along with what you previously said about the herbal beers.
I mean, up until recently, I guess I would have answered the question a little differently. I would have said that I think we're just in the long now of all of these things existing forever again, right? Like we're probably never going to go back to a time when they don't exist. All these styles that were maybe lost or nearly lost and needed a renaissance in order to come back and be sustainable again. I think a lot of that is still going to continue to be sustainable, but what happens economically for the next few years is going to determine whether or not they can grow and become, real business ventures for these people who, maybe need that to be more than just this small sort of anecdotal example of something historical that still exists. I mean, my hope is that all of those things can continue to exist, even if the fervor and the spending and the hype around some of them goes away, because that was never sustainable anyway. So if they weren't preparing for the hype to go away and be sustainable, then they were kind of making a mistake to begin with. My hope, just from a beer history and a beer nerd perspective, is that examples of these styles that are excellent just continue to persist in the marketplace one way or another, so that people who really want them can continue to get a hold of them, and the producers who are making them can continue to sustain themselves and their families as a long-term business, even if it means kind of being static. I think that should be an achievable goal for some of these things.
We have another question from Michael McAllister from the Fervent Few. He says, New Belgium brought back their Shift Pale Ale for their current variety pack. That's a beer I would have bet on sticking around when it debuted, but it did not. Looking back the last 5 to 10 years, what was a nationally released new beer or cider you thought would have become a permanent part of a company lineup, but didn't last more than a year or two?
Interesting.
I
Huh.
I can tell you mine. Although it's still technically around their push behind it has died is Lagunitas Daytime. When
Yeah.
when
Okay.
that came out, they were really pushing because they were seeing like was it all day IPA from Founders was killing
Hmm.
it, and it was this idea of like if somebody else can make a session IPA or a session pale whatever that is low calorie and really be killing it, there's got to be room in the market. And what they found out was that really Founders was a standalone. And I would say the same thing is going on with like White Claw and Seltzer. It is a
Yes.
standalone phenomena
It's a
where
White Claw category.
yeah, everybody jumps in thinking that they can, oh, there's room to play. No, there's not. There's no room in the
Yeah.
sandbox to play.
It's a great example. For different reasons, I think this one is going to be tricky. Is Sam 76? I love that beer. If you've had it or not had it, it's a ale lager blend. It's got a little bit of a citrus wheat kind of component to it, that I think is just a slamming beer. But the positioning, the marketing, um, hasn't really put it in. I mean, Sam hasn't. Boston Beer hasn't had another big hit in a long time. They tend to have things like Rebel IPA that is like the biggest launched craft beer that year, and then 2 years later it's basically gone. That's been kind of their track record for a while. I'm interested to see if Sam Calgione can switch that up a little bit. Um, but I think Sam 76 is one that I am nervous is going to become one of those very soon.
A flash in
Just
the
because
pan.
yeah, it just hasn't hit the numbers that they need it to. It hasn't. It's not growing. It's not part of a conversation. Nobody really knows how to talk about it exactly. So
I don't even know anything about it. I've never had it. No, I don't know.
it was a massive release, and it
Not
was
in California, man.
I love that beer.
Yeah, nobody in the Bay Area is drinking any Sam Adams at all.
Yeah,
So
Allagash had one. You remember Hoppy Table Beer?
yeah, and that's a great beer.
That was a great beer, and
So,
poof,
yeah,
yeah,
table beers in general, it's like daytime. There's very few people in the category that are gonna survive that.
yeah.
At
I
least
mean,
at a
everybody thinks that they look at the market and they see 85% of people still
yeah,
drinking light lager, and they're like, "There's so much promise there."
no.
But what they don't understand is that they're not drinking that because it's 4% and cheap. They're drinking it because it's been around forever. They see it a million times a day. You can stock up on a 24 pack pretty easily and put it in your fridge and not have to think about it. Nobody's looking for like the artisanal alternative to
Yeah.
that.
We have one more question from Sammer on Fervent View. Says, does Kiser like live music? If so, which deceased musician would he wish to see live?
And I've talked about this a bunch with my wife because she listens to music a lot. I don't listen to music in general, let alone live shows, often. Like I have to like remember, like, oh, I should put some music on, like while I'm cooking, because I'm a writer, and as a writer, you can't really listen to music while you're writing. Like it's cognitive overload.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's noisy, you can't do it. So there aren't a lot of times in my life where I have space and I'm working with my hands and I'm in like a more chill mode where I can like listen to music. And so I tend to just like listen to what my friends listen to. It's more of a passive kind of association that I have. But when I do get to go out to shows, which is rare these days, having kids and whatnot, but was a little more common when I first moved to Chicago. I would always just be like emotionally overwhelmed by live shows. I fucking loved it. Uh, yeah, I loved it. I think if I were able to see, he said deceased.
Yeah, deceased.
I mean, I would want to see something like fucking Prince. Like I want to see theatrics. Like I
Right.
love that stuff. When you're at a show like that, like it really feels like magic to you, and like you can kind of just be dispossessed of your body for a second. Like it's pretty transportive. I love that stuff. Um, yeah, I guess that would be my pick. I would pick Prince.
He didn't ask me, but I'm gonna say the Ramones original lineup.
Oh man.
So thank you, Michael. I'm gonna hit stop record on this. We can chat a little bit longer off the record.
Okay.
But thank
Man,
you
that
for
hour just flew by.
yeah, we did
That's
like
how.
about
That's what it's
45
like, huh?
minutes. Yeah, exactly. We did about 45 minutes, and I'm sure someday they wanted it to be longer. So, but it is what it is. I'd rather
I
be
love
a
it.
little more concise. So, thank you so much for coming on, and again, thank you so much for letting me contribute to Good Beer Hunting, and inviting me to. If you, I haven't seen you drink a beer this whole time.
Yeah. I'm drinking
Okay,
my Lou.
so I've got my Ollie Ollie glass,
Oh, right on.
and yeah, so that was amazing.
Cheers.
And I still have to stay loyal, and be promote myself while I'm promoting GBH too.
Nice.
But
I've got my third bottle in the fridge still.
okay, well,
I'm
maybe you
excited.
should open it while we're off the record.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much, and cheers.